This episode of the Linux Action Show is brought to you by the good-looking folks at GoDaddy.com. Use our code Linux and save yourself some cash. And welcome to the Linux Action Show, Season 18, Episode 7. It was shot live on September 18th for release later today. My name is Chris, and joining me on Skype is Alan. Hey there, Alan.
Hey, Chris.
Hey, welcome back to the show, man. We've got a great show today, too. If some of you might have caught my tweet last night, later in the show, we're going to talk about pfSense. It just released a new version yesterday, and this is seriously the best firewall in the world, and we'll show you how to set up like a boss. Alan, we've had people talk about wanting to do QoS, maybe to limit their roommates' bandwidth, things like that. By the end of today's episode, you'll know how to do that. We've also got a few news stories that are interesting, including one that I think might indicate Android is going to be the desktop of the future. At least for 2012. I'll make my prediction in the news segment. And, of course, we've got our regular picks. But first, I thought I would address obviously, Brian is still not here today. And it sounds like he's going to take a little while off from the show. He's going on what he calls a sabbatical. And, I think that's just essentially a way to give Brian a way to focus more on other projects he has going on. And I know some of you are concerned that means a change in tone for the show. And I can't deny that. There probably will be some change of tone. But I think also there's going to be a lot of benefits. While Alan is here with us, I think you'll find that Alan has an incredible background in open source and is an extremely intelligent person, which makes this whole conversation process a lot of fun. The things we talk about on the Linux Action Show, really, the open source software and Linux and all of these things have such a huge impact on the technology landscape. I mean, they really do make a difference in the world. And this is going to give us an opportunity to raise the level of dialogue, have some good, intelligent conversation, some level-headed insights to some of these things. And really, Alan, I mean, having in-depth technical conversations, that's our bread and butter.
Yeah,
I mean, we love doing that stuff.
And that's why we started TechSnap. It was like, hey, I like to talk shop, and so do you. So why don't we make a show out of that?
And let's just talk shop in front of a camera and just share it with the world. And really, Linux Action Show has always been a lot like that. And of course, the content's only going to get better. Really, since the beginning of the Linux Action Show, I've done all of the research and production for every show. And so the content won't be changing. And with Alan here and his extensive understanding of all of these things, it's only just going to get better. So I myself am extremely excited, and I promise we're going to keep having fun. Don't worry about that. It's still the same old Linux Action Show, and things are just going to get even better. Right, Alan?
Yep.
All right, man. Well, thank you again for joining and sitting in for the B-Man until whenever he does manage to make it back. Now, I have got a Runs Linux this week that is totally up my alley that I think I'll share with you guys. Check this thing out. It is a ruggedized Linux server designed for video streaming. This thing is, if you're watching the video version, it looks like it could survive a freaking bomb. It is so nice. It's got like this thinned architecture for cooling. It actually runs a 1.8 gigahertz Intel Core Duo with 4 gigs of RAM, and it has a built-in H.264 video encoder, a removable 160 gigabyte SATA 2 solid-state drive for long-term video recording, and it looks like something that maybe the military might bolt down or you might put on some sort of extreme sports machine.
Well, even, if you just go around and doing live broadcasts from various locations, you just... Like, when you guys tried to go to Linux Northwest or whatever, you had, quite a bit of issue getting all your equipment there, and, you try not to, you have to be very careful with the equipment so you don't break it.
Yeah.
So if you have something a little more ruggedized that can let you do your live stream from anywhere and just pick it up and go, it could be quite handy.
It's monstrous. It definitely has some interesting connections. Its ruggedized features include the fact that it can operate in 32 degrees Fahrenheit to 122 degrees. So that's 0 degrees Celsius to 50 degrees Celsius for you, Alan. And it also has a whole range of features, but the one that I care about the most is that it runs something called Parvis Linux, which is a real-time Linux distribution for video encoding. Isn't that neat? Yeah. I love seeing Linux get more and more into video workflows. I am so hopeful that eventually it'll be worked into my video workflow. I'm always looking for something. Now, before we go on, I want to say good morning to GoDaddy.com and, of course, to the wonderful Danica Kirkpatrick, who always is visiting on the front page of Sundays. Now, my son Dylan, this is your moment to tune in because he's a Danica Kirkpatrick fan. And, Dylan, I have something to tell you. And when you're over at GoDaddy.com, the world's #1 domain name registrar, use the code Linux to save 10% when you check out, or use the code Linux20 and save 20% on shared hosting plans. And really, that's a pretty great deal. And you can always go over to GoDaddy.com and get any kind of domain that suits your needs. I was recently thinking about getting some for the show. Like we have TechSnap.tv.
Yep.
And I was thinking about doing something like LinuxActionShow.tv or something like that. So if you just want to go to that show, you just put the domain in, and we just have it forward to the sub page on Jupiter Broadcasting. So you just go right to that category. Yep. And it's a great way where you can go and get these cheap domains and make something like site navigation just like a no-brainer for people that want to dial right in.
Yeah,
and,
especially also if you have people trying to access your site from their phone. The
yes.
less typing they have to do on the phone, the easier it'll be for them.
And actually, looking at our web stats, I bought jblive.tv. And I see a ton of people that go to jblive.tv. It takes them to the live stream, but then they just bounce over to any other page they want because it's a shorter URL.
Well, my dad can only remember the short one, so.
There you go, right? And see, the thing is, too, is when we set up JupiterBroadcasting.com, that was pre-Twitter. That was pre-short URLs. Big URLs were in. Why not?
Yeah.
There you go.
You know, it was all about the search terms in the URL rather than making it as short as possible.
Yeah, exactly. So thanks to GoDaddy and helping me fix that oversight I made about 6 years ago. And, of course, I always use that code.
The other thing is I saw somebody in the chat room saying that they bought their GoDaddy hosting and they bought like the 4-year package and saved all kinds of money.
Right.
Especially because that 20% you're saving with your coupon is huge. Plus they're giving you a discount for buying a long-term package.
And it's cool to check out with the code Linux. I just think, all right, Alan.
I just did too. I had to renew like 8 domains.
Yeah.
So code Linux. Woot.
Now, for those of you new to the show, Alan here is a new owner of a Nexus S Android phone. How's that going, Alan? How's that working for you?
I'm loving it, and I haven't actually, tried to jailbreak it or whatever you want to call it. But
it's not as imperative on a Nexus phone, but you do get some more features. And this app, my app pick today, might get you to it because I think you get extra features if you're rooted. Now, to be honest with you, I have not tested this on a non-rooted device. That is a little disclaimer. So I try not to pick apps that require you to be rooted, and I think this doesn't require it, but I'm not positive.
See, specifically for mine, one of the reasons to get it was testing our video streaming to Android. Yeah. And so I'm trying to keep mine not rooted so that it works more like other people's phones.
Right. Well, let me tell you about my app pick. It is Samba file sharing for Android, and it literally turns your Android phone into a file server that looks like a Windows file share on your network. If you're just browsing from a Windows box or from a Linux box, it just shows up as any other share, and you can actually share out your SD card, so you could copy over your media from your network to your SD card. And if you're familiar with Samba on Linux, I believe they've just taken the SMB software and packaged it up into an Android app. It's got pretty good review ratings too, which is always nice. And really, what I did in my usage scenarios, I threw this on my Galaxy Tab. My Galaxy Tab gets connected to my home Wi-Fi, and then it shows up as just a node. And then if I want to listen to a podcast, I just drag it onto my SD card, and then I go fire up my podcast player. I really like this app, so check that out. And then, as a follow-up app, I have a link in the show notes that lets you browse SMB shares from your Android device. So this first app pick lets you become a Samba server. The second app pick lets you browse Samba shares. It's a little wonky though. A little wonky.
But that could be quite powerful if you have, a file server set up sharing with Samba or whatever, and you want to.
Indeed, sir. Indeed. Now
unlike a Galaxy Tab, you might be able to, pull videos off and watch them.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And the other thing that's nice with the Samba server part, now jumping back to the Samba server part, is when you take a bunch of pictures, it's nice just to be able to, because I have my photo management software, I have, just a link to my tab. I can just drag it in there and drag it in my photo management software. It imports the photos. Boom, I'm done.
Yeah, which is the Samba server. You can pull files off the Galaxy as easy as you can push them on.
Yeah.
You don't have to, go find the Galaxy, plug in the USB, and do all that.
Sync it up, and run their software, right? And when you're working under Linux, you don't have to worry about is it going to be detected, anything like that.
Exactly.
Now you have a pretty handy BSD pick for us this week, Alan. You want to tell us about it?
Yes, BSD picks are a little harder to come by because most things in BSD are, it can just run Linux software.
So it's probably not going to be a reoccurring segment for too long because
we'll run out of things to do.
It's kind of universal, really.
Because the first thing I had in mind, apparently they don't make it anymore.
Oh, okay. That happens sometimes, man. Don't worry about it. All right, so tell us about this one.
This week's pick is port upgrade.
Yeah, port upgrade is a great pick.
Yes. So in FreeBSD, the package, one of the two package systems is called ports, and it's basically a directory structure that contains 25,000 applications sorted into categories, and you can just, with a couple of commands, you can just find the one you want and install it. But later on, after you've installed it and it's been a little while, you're going to need to upgrade it to the newer version. And there's a process for doing that, but if you have to upgrade like 30 apps and deal with all their dependencies, it can be a little hectic. So port upgrade is just one command that can do it all for you.
Yeah, and my limited time I had as a FreeBSD server administrator, port upgrade was my tool of choice.
Yep.
Especially for staying up with some of the security updates for stuff in the port tree.
Exactly. Because the other thing is, you can actually have it run as a cron tab and do all your updates like every night.
And it'll email you a report of what was done and all that kind of stuff. So that's really nice too.
Or if there's a problem as well. But yeah, specifically because the ports tree is independent of the version of FreeBSD you have. Unlike with a Linux distribution where there's a certain version of Apache or whatever that comes with your distro.
Right.
The ports tree is agnostic, so it doesn't matter if you're using FreeBSD 6, 7, 8, or 9. The same ports tree applies to all and gets updated every single day.
So that's interesting. So you could run, say, FreeBSD 7, even though they're about to come out with FreeBSD 9, but still be running the absolute latest MySQL and Apache.
Exactly. And the other thing is that the ports tree contains multiple versions. For example, you can use the latest version of MySQL 5.0, 5.1, or 5.5.
You know, that could be extremely handy when you're working with a web app that, say, requires a specific version of PHP or something like that.
Or if you're adding a new server to a cluster and the older servers have the older version and you need to match it.
Oh, dude, yeah. Well, what about like, I mean, one of the main reasons I would upgrade PHP or MySQL would be because of security reasons.
Yeah, and so it has the latest of 5.0 with all the patches.
Oh, okay. So you get the latest major version with all the patches.
Yeah, so you can get 5.0 point the latest, or 5.1 point the latest, or 5.5 point the latest.
Right on. That's a great pick.
Yeah, and the same thing with PHP. If you haven't upgraded your app to work with 5.3, they still have 5.2 with a copy of all of the modules.
Not bad, Alan. Not bad. Well, the chat room is suggesting that we change the pick segment, to like just a universal pick, one that might work for FreeBSD or Linux pick, or what about even like a web app? Because sometimes there's like stuff like Google. Like I haven't talked about Google Music on the show, which I think is awesome. Which is an awesome music manager for Linux.
Yeah, well, you talked a little bit about how it could integrate with the new Ubuntu.
Yeah, I snuck that in there just because I was so desperate to talk about it. Because I like it.
Pretty much any app that'll run on Linux will run on BSD.
Yeah, especially with that Linux compatibility layer, right?
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's for already compiled stuff. That's mostly only used for commercial applications where you can't compile it from source.
Oh, sure.
Where you can't make a package out of it.
Yeah, because otherwise you just build it for FreeBSD.
Natively, and it'll be faster.
Yeah. All right, Alan, let's do the news. All right, Alan, the top story on the news docket for this week. NVIDIA releases a new long-lived Linux driver. This is kind of interesting, Alan, and this might also apply to FreeBSD because I think they share the same driver quite a bit.
Probably.
This is, if you're familiar, and actually this is what's really interesting is they call this out themselves, but if you're familiar with Ubuntu's long-term support editions, then you're probably kind of familiar with the concept here. NVIDIA, the version 2.7.5.28 of their driver is going to be called their long-lived branch release. This is a new category of releases, so I think it needs a little explanation, NVIDIA says. We've started maintaining a longer-lived release branches that only take critical or low-risk fixes. These releases are intended for users of non-legacy GPUs who don't necessarily need the latest and greatest features. If you've ever used Ubuntu's long-term releases, then this should be a similar idea. I think this is huge.
Yeah. NVIDIA's already had this for the desktop for quite a while, especially with their Enforce-based chipsets for motherboards. Mm-hmm. They've had, especially more targeted at their business customers, they would have these long-lived releases of the drivers for everything. So there'd be a specific release cycle of like every 9 months or whatever, and that was the only driver update. So you weren't constantly being nagged with driver updates, especially ones that had the possibility to break compatibility with some of their app or something.
Yeah. Now, like the chat room is saying, Sonic Spectre is saying is, OpenGL 3.0. That's big news, and that would be the kind of things where I'd say somebody out of Workstation would want to do a driver upgrade. Right. But it takes quite a bit for a professional workstation, like say someone at LucasArts who's doing graphics for a motion picture on the Linux desktop. He's not going to want to just throw in the latest NVIDIA driver because they released a new one. So for him, having something that he doesn't have to manage, something he doesn't have to worry about, I think it makes a lot of sense.
Especially if the machine is managed by the IT department, not him.
I have set up a few Ubuntu long-term support stations in schools, and anything where you can set it and then just maintain it and just continue to get value out of it is really the key thing for businesses. So this is great.
Yep.
This is really showing NVIDIA is really trying to step up and making Linux with an NVIDIA chip in it a viable corporate workstation machine, and I think that's great.
Yeah, because I remember that they have this, I think it was called CBP or something like that system, a series of logos they would stick on motherboards that had these corporate business plans that would provide like long-term support like this. And then, especially them making one specifically so that it would fit with the release architecture of Ubuntu. Right? They're like, they have a long-term release, but we don't offer them a driver that they can depend on like that. And so they made one.
It's interesting that they call that out specifically. That just NVIDIA has it on their mind.
Well, because they basically have this 2-mode release cycle where they have the really rapid one for gamers because they want the latest one because that offers that extra 0.1% performance,
or maybe some tweak for some new game released or something.
Exactly. That's most of the updates in NVIDIA drivers. If you actually read the change logs, are fix this performance in this game, fix this stuttering in this game, and so on. And so, if you're using it as a workstation, then having that long-term version that you can depend on is quite handy.
Yeah. Now, speaking of people who have things on their mind, Google has Intel on the mind, and at the latest Intel conference that was just going on this last week, they were showing off a lot of hardware running Android, a lot of Intel-based hardware. In fact, they even showed off a new, not yet released, go figure, processor platform that is x86 based, that uses so little power, they had 2 lights powering it via solar panel. Ooh. And that they said that the power efficiency of these new chips, that if you put computers from 10 years ago of the same, and you put them side by side to one of these new chips, the computers from 10 years ago would only be able to run for 20 minutes on today's batteries. And they're saying these new systems are going to be able to get hours and hours and hours out of just a 50-watt battery. So, of course, now Intel is trying to approach Google and court them to port Android over to Intel. And so Google's stepping up, and they're kind of making a big deal out of this and saying, Google's going to commit every release of Android side by side of the ARM version will be an Intel version with just as much support, fully optimized for the x86 architecture. But the dirty secret really is Android has had an x86 version for a very long time now, and an official Google project. Now, I don't know how much love it gets from Google, but this isn't something they're just starting. They've been doing this for a while. But Alan, I think if you
right, because the Chromebooks or whatever were based on that, weren't they?
Chromebooks don't run Android though.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. Right, Chrome OS, never mind.
But they want to get Android running on Atom chips. That's the thing.
Yes.
And you can do it. I've done it on the show before. Yeah. But I really think if you break that barrier, if you take Android, so you take like CyanogenMod, right?
Yep.
If there's a mainline Android branch that is built for x86, why couldn't the CyanogenMod guys, the people that make one of the most popular alternative Android distros out there, why couldn't they take that and make a distro for the desktop? Why couldn't they just make an...
them at all.
I think they will. I mean, I've already done a little searching on this and found people that are working on this. Is that a threat to Linux? Because it runs on top of Linux, but if you could tell people, you could have the same OS on your netbook, on your phone, and on your desktop, and there's this really vibrant app marketplace with tons of games and Netflix support and movies in that app marketplace. Are you going to start seeing maybe those PCs at Walmart instead of with Linspire? Are you going to start seeing them maybe with Android loaded on there? What do you think, Alan? You think that's a possibility?
It's quite possible, and I think it's an easier grab at the less sophisticated users than a Linux is.
Well, and there's definitely some brand behind Google. Google is rated the number one recognized brand or something like that in the world.
Probably.
No, they were just recently. And so you say, this is running Google Android, and you can get a PC running Google Android, that might sell in a way that PC running Linspire never sold. It'd be interesting to see if Linux's next round of competition comes from something that's based on it. Anyways, that's just something I want to put out there. I'd love to hear your thoughts out there, everyone, so leave us some comments and let us know. But I also am concerned with Intel now kind of getting a boost from Android, where does that leave MeeGo? Because MeeGo was sort of Intel's x86-based mobile platform, right? So if they step up with Android now, MeeGo might not become as important to Intel. So we'll just kind of have to watch it.
Well, yeah, they already suspended development, right? So,
rumored, sir, rumored. You're spreading lies. No, they
I'm
released.
pretty sure you covered it a couple weeks ago when I was on the show.
They released a statement saying, "No, we're still committed, but just don't look over here for a little while."
Yeah, we're still committed, but we're not actually working on it right now.
Yeah, right, exactly. Okay, let's move on to the next story in the news docket. Now, this one, Alan, you put up on my radar, and this sounds actually kind of surprising. Intel often funds different, I don't know if you call them grants, but different projects at universities, and they've added a new stipulation with the funding that Intel provides, and that is universities that receive funds are not supposed to file patents on what they've discovered, and if they create software, they're supposed to open source it. This is a great move. This is
kind of how university work was always supposed to be, right?
I agree, right?
That's how we ended up with things like BSD.
Right, exactly. That's a perfect example of why funded research in universities should be made available to the public. And I think Intel groks that, and I really think that's pretty awesome. They have 4 universities that are involved in this right now. And Stanford University and UC Berkeley are also are in them, and so is Carnegie Mellon.
Yeah.
And
those are some of the biggest computer research universities in the U.S.
Yeah. So great move by Intel. They're also kind of, I guess, partnering with HP on some of this stuff, but I don't know exactly. Speaking of Intel, Alan, there's some Intel driver support getting added to FreeBSD, as indicated in the latest FreeBSD progress report. This is interesting. Would you mind explaining to people what the FreeBSD progress report is that have never heard of it before?
Yeah, once a quarter, FreeBSD publishes a progress report just explaining what they've been doing for the last 3 months.
A very extensive progress report.
Yeah, because the FreeBSD development is a little more driven than Linux, rather than a bunch of people just writing patches against the system and contributing. Well, that's more the kernel that's in Linux, where there's only like 2 core developers and everybody else just throws patches at it.
Yeah.
But basically, there's a core team of about 10 people that kind of set the direction for what they're going to be doing. And then a mainline team of about 400 developers develops things. And then separately, there are a bunch of people start projects to do this and that and the other thing. And so there's quite a bit going on, and not everybody wants to follow the mailing list every day.
Yeah.
And so they have these progress reports, which are just an easy-to-read way to find out what's been happening.
Yeah, and for the most part, it's all pretty technical stuff, but they're getting improved support for the Intel GPU driver. And this is what I found pretty interesting in the progress report. They're making a free PlayStation 3 FreeBSD port for version 9.0, which is going to come out soon.
I think NetBSD's been on there for a while, but FreeBSD...
How much of a demand is it to run FreeBSD on a PlayStation 3, though? Is it for, computing tests?
All it takes... probably quite a few people were using clusters of PlayStation 3s as cheap grid computing. But also, all it takes is one guy that has a PlayStation 3 and wants to do it, and it can get done, right?
Yeah, I suppose so, huh?
That's how... There's all kinds of eclectic projects like that in open source.
And if you can break out of that PS3 VM, you get a pretty great box. If you have to live inside that PlayStation 3 VM, it was horribly slow. Now, I think it's about time, Alan. On the news docket, there's usually always a spot to find out who is suing Google or who Google is fighting. And one of the stories we've been covering now for a couple of weeks is this whole Oracle versus Google over the use of the Java Dalvik virtual machine inside of Android. Basically, Oracle thinks that Google ripped them off, and Google thinks that they had the right to do it. So Google went to the courts and said, hey, we would like to just have a summary judgment on this stuff. Are we in violation? Are we not? Let's just decide. Let's just move on. Figure this out. We don't have to go to court over all this stuff. Well, it turns out they do. The judge said, sorry, guys, you are going to court, and you still need to have the 2 Larrys meet. So obviously, Google's taking this threat extremely serious and is responding in kind. They have bought another 1,000 patents from IBM. So this is on top of the 1,000 patents they've already bought. And if you recall, the company also just got a 1,000 patents, or somewhere around there. Might even know. I'm sorry.
No, the Motorola one was 17,000
patents for Motorola.
Can you say broken patent system when that company owns that many patents?
Well, seriously, right? I mean, so they've just bought 2,000 patents from IBM. They've just bought 12,000 patents from Motorola Mobility. They just sold some of those patents to HTC. We have a serious war brewing here, don't we?
Yep. And Google was trying to fight the FUD by getting a summary judgment so that people would stop being scared of using Android because it might have this patent problem.
Yeah.
Everybody remember when we had this problem with the .gif file format?
I unfortunately liken it more back to SCO in some senses.
Right.
And SCO was claiming copyright violation on like the sysv startup system, right?
Mm-hmm.
And while I don't think that really killed Linux, I do think it put some cold water on the deployment of Linux. I really honestly do. And because I know it came up a lot in conversations I had with clients. The more serious, larger institutions that have like IT directors and stuff that were following the news, they were concerned early on about deploying Linux. And now it's kind of that same approach, right? Getting doubt in there in the minds of OEMs about Android. Get doubt in their mind. There could be issues here. So, of course, Google's doing everything they can to fight this off. And you saw that in the last week, the U.S. just put through some patent reform that's going to kick in that sort of changes the U.S. patent system to first to patent instead of first to invent. That could clear some issues up. That also means that if you have the deep pockets to just patent every little concept you come up with, like big corporations would, then you could kind of squeeze the little guy out. So we'll see where all this goes.
Yeah, because the little guy can't afford to file for a patent until he actually got something and started to sell it. And so, one competitor hears about it and patents it.
It could be an issue. We'll see where it goes.
It's a bad idea. It's help for big businesses and, screws the little guy. It was
in this case, though, Google is big business, so they can play that game.
But, what happens when I want to patent something and somebody else manages to say, like, oh, we patented it first?
Don't tell anybody about it. First of all, come up with something completely new that's never, ever been thought of, ever. That's always easy to do. And then second of all, completely develop and invent it and don't tell a single soul about it. And then third, go finance and get the patent and the manufacturer and you're set.
Yeah, so I'm supposed to finance it without telling anybody about it.
Yeah, totally, dude. Don't worry about it. Just a little detail. So interesting story just to watch as this massive entity that is Google sort of arms itself for war. And it seems like a little bit of hyperbole to say that, but in fact, I really thought all this patent stuff was just, who cares, right? Until I started reading sort of in between the text of what Google was saying about the reasons they bought Motorola Mobility, was they were absolutely frightened. Motorola had pending lawsuits coming up against it, still does. And they were absolutely terrified that Motorola Mobility was going to strike a patent licensing deal with Apple.
Yep.
And, I think they fully acknowledge their platform is under complete and total attack. So they're arming up, and it's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Now, let's talk about something that's a little softer, a little more Linuxy, and that is the latest from openSUSE. Now, openSUSE, I think it might have been just wrapping up. They had a openSUSE conference in Germany. It's an annual event where developers and community members could share ideas and insights into openSUSE. And one of the things that came out was some details about the next version of openSUSE, 12.1. And now you'll note that it's not 12.0. openSUSE, the guys at openSUSE said, we just prefer to skip the .0 releases. There's some bad connotations with .0, so we just skip that. That's not really how it works,
That just
guys.
makes the point 1 be the point 0. It's really...
I know, right? But all right, we'll give it to him. Here's kind of what sounds kind of interesting to me, though, is they talked about openSUSE 12 is going to offer... Version 3 of the GNOME desktop. The classical version 2 won't be available as an alternative, as the developers decided to focus on making GNOME 3 optimal. And they didn't want to distribute their efforts across GNOME 3 and 2. It will have KDE in it, but it's going to have the new KDE 4. But check this out. There's actually still a big calling for KDE 3 within the openSUSE community. And KDE 3 packages are actually going to be created for openSUSE 12.1. They just won't be shipping with it. But you'll probably be able to get your hands on them online. KDE 3? Really? I mean, KDE 4.7 is nice.
Yeah.
Alan, you're a KDE guy. Can you explain why people are sticking with KDE 3 to me? I know we got people in our chat room.
I'm using 4.4 or something. I haven't upgraded 4.7 yet, but I don't know why you would stick with 3.
Couple other interesting features, like the chat room was mentioning. It's going to have the 3.0 kernel, and it's going to support ButterFS, even as the root file system. And ButterFS, it's no ZFS, but it's looking pretty good. It's still in the early stages, but you see these distros are starting to get more and more comfortable with support for for Btrfs. So check that out. And then obviously the overall big impact, the big picture impact of openSUSE 11.12 is it's laying the groundwork for the next version of SUSE Linux Enterprise Server, which to me is generally an indication when you have these distros like Fedora reaches this in their cycle occasionally as well, when they hit the cycle where that version of that Linux distro is going to be the basis of the enterprise product, it always seems like those releases get the extra attention and the extra polish. Yep. And those are always the great ones to sort of anchor your boat to, because they're going to get also the long-term patches as they start ramping up that enterprise version. So there's some nice perks in these releases. So that's one good little detail to look out for. The chat room's asking if Btrfs supports trim support, and I believe it does. I think you have to turn it on, though. All right. Next story on the news docket for this week. Unless, Alan, did I miss anything? Because I'm going to move on to this gaming story unless I
don't think so, no.
Okay, good. This is a really interesting story that I wanted to throw in at the news docket. So Linux game developers upload their own game to Pirate Bay and see their sales go up. This is kind of an interesting thing they did, too, because when they uploaded it to Pirate Bay, they replaced all of the artwork in the game with pirates, like all the little people. So this is, I mean, first of all, a Linux game developer, that's just got a soft spot in my heart. But check out this fun little game here, and it's called, I gotta get the name of it here. I think it's like No Time to Explain. Yep, and I haven't played it yet myself, but I love the idea of these couple of devs who are like, you know what, screw it. People are gonna pirate our stuff. We'll just put our game up there. We'll have fun with it. We'll give them a limited release. We'll put everybody in pirate hats, and then they'll find out about the game, and then maybe they'll go buy it. And you know what? It worked great, and I just want to give them a mention because you guys know I'm always a fan of native games on Linux, and I always want to give them a plug when somebody's working on that. And so I have a link in the show notes where you can see this trailer. You can read a little bit about the story. He said. One of the things the developers said is we saw really positive feedback from users. When we saw reactions in the comments on the Pirate Bay torrent link, they said we saw reactions. The people said they went out and bought it just because they liked the attitude we took with it. They said in the end, we didn't find it hurt sales in any way. Yeah. That's great. So check that out. It looks like a fun side scroller, and then it looks like it's going to be a multi-part deal too, which I kind of dig these days. Where episode 1 came out, and then in December the second half comes out. It also includes a level editor where you can go in and make your own little levels and stuff. It's got great little animation. It looks like a fun game. So go check out the show notes for a link to that. Yeah. All right, Alan. What do you think? Time to talk about pfSense?
I think so.
All right, everyone. Well, that's all the news for this week. It's time for the pfSense review. Now, the timing of this is awesome because version 2.0 of pfSense, the best firewall in the entire world, came out yesterday. And in fact, I was saying on the pre-show live stream that I think pfSense is such a good piece of open source software. I think it is such a tremendous product that I feel like it deserves to be as popular as Apache is. It's just amazing. And we've actually talked a little bit about pfSense in just the last episode of TechSnap, building the ultimate home router. And we kind of got the idea to go a little further in last. Alan, do you want to kind of maybe share our thoughts on that?
Yeah. So we've started up this home server segment on TechSnap about how you would solve all the various problems you might have at your house with, a home server. And on TechSnap, we try to just cover the concepts of what you would want to set up, and try to do it also in a cross-platform way. So how you would do it on Linux, BSD, or Windows. Just cover the concepts more. Yeah. But for last, we thought that a lot of people are interested in how to actually build it. So we would do more of a hands-on setting it up kind of thing on last.
Yep.
So likely for the next couple episodes of last, they'll tie in with TechSnap where we'll actually show you how to set up some of the stuff we talk about on TechSnap.
It should be the best of both worlds because you won't have to watch either show to get great content. But if you do watch both shows together, then
you're going to get a little bit extra.
You get a more round picture of the technology that we're talking about. So I hope you guys like that because Al and I are really excited about the idea because half the time we could go for another hour and we just decide to cut it off at some point. And TechSnap, that's our server, network, and administration podcast. That's the snap part. And so we love to cover these things at a conceptual level in that show. But let's get our boots on the ground here, Alan. Let's talk about pfSense. Now, one of the great things about pfSense is if you've got like a spare machine around, seriously, like a spare machine, like a 486, a Pentium, whatever, a nicer machine, you can grab free pfSense, and within 5 minutes, you can have pfSense installed on a box. Really, the install for pfSense is maybe a 3-minute process. It's super easy. It's text-based, but it's just answering yes, no, selecting your interfaces and things like that. But one of the questions that came into the show was, how can you do things like traffic shaping so that way your roommates can't steal all your bandwidth, or do things like that? Or how can I get information about how my network is doing without having to set up like Fluke level equipment? And if you're not familiar with Fluke, go Google that. That's pretty impressive stuff. And pfSense is here to save the day, and with version 2.0 just out, although don't let the 2.0 thing scare you like the openSUSE guys are worried about, because this thing's been in like beta forever, right, Alan?
Yeah, a long time.
Yeah, so I mean, it's well tested. And one of pfSense's strongest attributes, other than the amazing technology that it's based off, I mean, I'm talking you guys as one of truly the best things that open source has to offer, and to cap it all off is they have an incredibly easy-to-use web interface. And if you're watching the video version, I'll show you a little bit while I talk about it. And one of the things I have up on my screen right now is the RRD graph that it has built right in to graph my overall network bandwidth usage, historical trends, and things like that. And you can kind of get an idea of maybe like when your network's busy, when your busy hours are. But on top of that, you can also do things like, I don't know, check the quality of your internet traffic. You know, are you having packet loss at certain points and things like that? So you can measure for things like that. So you can find out if maybe there's certain times in the day when your network isn't keeping up to demands and stuff like that. That's where pfSense can be extremely powerful without ever having to run a single command line. And
especially if you have like a service level agreement with your ISP. If you're using this as a corporate router, where they say that you'll experience less than this amount of packet loss. Well, having a graph that proves that you're having more means you can actually
Right. And one of the great things about pfSense is the package system. You just go into their packages, and like you're familiar with like a distro, you just go look for the available packages it has, and it has things in here like Avahi, which is a really nice home server network technology. It's got proxy servers in here. It's got DNS servers in here, and you literally are just one click away from installing these things and then getting a web GUI to set them up. I mean, I really love it. You also get a fantastic interface to manage your firewall and manage your NAT. Now, of course, I have a very minimal firewall setup here on my box, but I think maybe, one of the best things about this is also its ability to play either at a corporate level, like on this massive internet connection, or on your home DSL line. It supports services like dynamic DNS, so it can update a remote DNS site every time your IP changes. It supports things like VPN, so you can VPN in and you can run them on alternative ports in case your ISP blocks you.
But also you can do site-to-site VPNs.
Mm-hmm.
So you can, if you have a pfSense box in 2 different locations, you can bridge the networks together.
I've gone on about some of my favorite features. Is there any particular feature that you just absolutely love about pfSense?
There's a bunch.
I know. Carp is one of them. I love Carp.
Yes. Yeah, so if you have 2 of them set up for load balancing and redundancy, but also it has a nice terminal as well. You don't have to do everything via the web interface.
That's true, actually.
It even has a little tool called pftop, which gives you basically a top-like interface to see what's happening on your network.
I'm showing it right now. This is the command line version. I have it running in a VirtualBox machine. So if I hit 9, so it gives you this whole menu-based system on the command line. If you do need to SSH in and you can't use the web GUI, you're not stuck with commands that you might not know how to use. So you hit number 9, and it gives you a real-time top process, like you would think for your system processes, only it's your network top talkers and things like that, and the protocols and ports. The command line, Alan, is actually that's a great point to bring up. It's very easy to use.
You can get a real shell if you want as well.
Mm-hmm. And you could do things like restart the web UI or even do an upgrade. But should we talk a little bit about traffic shaping under pfSense? Because I think that might be...
Because that was one of the things a lot of people were interested in.
Yeah, and
especially if you have little brothers, or if you have roommates or anything, other people using your traffic, or even if you just want to shape certain types of traffic.
Well, like EB in our chat room today. EB was watching the live stream, and he says, the live stream's a little stuttery. Could be that FTP download I have going in the background. Well, FTP is one of those protocols where it's completely unaware of what else is on your wire, and FTP will consume as much bandwidth as it can take. And it doesn't care if you're doing video streaming, doesn't care if you're playing a video game. It just takes as much as it can get its hands on. So you can do things like QoS to sort of hamper that down. And one of the nice things that pfSense will let you do is you can only have it kick in the hampering down, the bandwidth restrictions when you're running out of bandwidth. So you can have everything be la-di-da-di, everything's fine, use as much bandwidth as you want, but if you start running into limitations, like you're trying to stream and download, it will just dynamically, in the background, the user doesn't even notice, start ratcheting down the amount of bandwidth assigned to that protocol. I love it, and it sounds like that might be a hard thing to set up, but it's super easy. In fact, on pfSense, when you're in the web UI, if you just go to the firewall section, they have a thing, they just have an option in here called Traffic Shaper. It's not like QoS or limiter or protocol inspection. It's just called Traffic Shaper. And you go to Traffic Shaper and then you tell it what kind you want. You can do it by queue, you can do it by, and by queue would let you do it by like, you could set up queues for traffic to fall into and then assign priority to it. Or you could set up a limiter where you could say you always limit, a protocol can only take this much. So if you never want to worry about your BitTorrent taking more than 30% of your connection, you put a limiter rule in, and anything that runs on the BitTorrent protocol will never use more than 30% of your connection. Alan, have you ever done anything like in your server setup with traffic shaping? You know, like
yeah, I used the now pfSense is based on the openBSD's PF firewall.
Yeah, which is incredible.
Yeah, but pfSense itself is actually built on top of FreeBSD. But on my servers, I use IPFW, the basic FreeBSD firewall, and I use its traffic shaping system called DummyNet. And I've used that extensively for things like throttling my remote backups so they don't completely saturate the link and you know, slow down people that are trying to use the web service or whatever.
Sure, yeah. All right, well, why don't we take a look at setting up a traffic rule, shaping rule in pfSense. You can do it on like the protocol layer, which might be the easiest way to go, but so let's just pretend like we're doing that. So we'll call this our BitTorrent rule, right? So we'll say BitTorrent, and you go in here and just give it any name you want. This is just for you to manage that. And then you can say enable or disable the layer 7 container. We'll go ahead and enable it. And then you can go and you can just add the protocol. And you can define the protocol based on the port, or they also just have a pretty extensive list of stuff already built in. So if you go down, you can find they already have BitTorrent in the list. How perfect is that? And you could do things like block, or you can do things like throttle. So we'll just say save. There we go. So now we have a BitTorrent. Now we have a limiter in effect that says as soon as you apply changes, as soon as I click this apply changes, I'm going to disallow BitTorrent traffic going out, or I'm just going to throttle it if traffic is tight. I mean, it really is that simple. And I now have a firewall rule in place, and I can go over in pfSense, and this is one of the things I love about pfSense, and this has gotten even better in the 2.0 version, is you can get real-time traffic stats and things like that. You can go right in here and get packet captures. You can, I just love this software so much. Where is the, so we go here, you can see right here, traffic, oops, not that one, my mouse, little
But Giant Robot in the chat room brought up an obvious question, is like, so I already have a network with my modem connected to a router and then all my machines connected to that. Where would I put pfSense? And in this case, what you'd want to do is put it between the modem and the router, and then go into your router and disable its DHCP. So basically, you're making the router act as just a switch now. Or in my case, my router still does the wireless part, but it doesn't give out IP addresses, and it doesn't do NAT.
Oh, nice.
That's the important thing, because if you leave the DHCP on your router on, it will NAT all the users, and then it'll hit the pfSense and get NATed a second time, and then go out to the internet, and that'll slow everything down and also make port forwarding a nightmare.
Now, you can't probably tell too closely because I've only been running it while we're doing this demo, but if you look at my bandwidth graph, I was starting to slowly creep up on my bandwidth usage, and now that I have disabled, or now that I have limited BitTorrent, you can actually see my bandwidth usage is starting to slow down. Now, I set the threshold for BitTorrent to be 25 kilobytes a second. Pretty low, right? And now you can see, if you're watching the video version, but if you're not, I'll just explain it to you at home, the line now is just hovering below 25 kilobits. In fact, it's even going down now that I've tampered down BitTorrent. So now I don't have to worry about interrupting Alan's Skype call or anything like that. It's just nice and steady. It'll take longer to download, but I just set it and forget it, and it just goes. And, I mean, how long did that take me to set up during the show?
Like 2.5 minutes.
It's pretty great. So that's just one of the many things. And of course, you can do, I mean, a lot of the things that people would do with a home server, you can also do with pfSense through these packages. It's got, it's got things like music sharing capability. It's got things that will let you remotely access your home computers. I got to say, go to pfSense. We got lots of links in the show notes, including tutorials on how to use it, guides for setting up traffic shaping. Alan, is there anything other?
Yeah, Dorsey in the chat room asked if, about some other packages it might have. He specifically mentioned an internet cafe. One of the things it has is a captive portal, so that people have to log in and maybe make a payment before they can use the internet, or even just agree to your terms to use the internet. And also with the package system you talked about, you can get things like Squid to do caching.
Mm-hmm. Now, why don't we wrap up talking about how you could implement this using, like, say, VirtualBox, because that's how I've done it here in this setup. You don't have to do it on physical hardware if you just want to try it out, and you can even use it as a router, even though it's in a virtual machine.
Yes, this is how I had mine set up originally. Right. Back when I had my server originally was running Windows because it was powering my TV as well. Now I have a separate machine for that, but I still wanted a real BSD router, and so all I did was set up VirtualBox, and when I created the VirtualBox, I specifically told it to have 2 network cards.
Yeah.
Now the physical machine has 2 network cards. The first one goes straight to the modem, and the second one goes to my switch for my internal LAN. Mm-hmm. So what I did was I used the VMware bridge setting, the VirtualBox bridge setting. So I told it, bridge the first NIC to my first real NIC, and the second virtual NIC to my second real NIC.
That's exactly how I set mine up here.
Yeah, and then you just set it up as if it was just the physical machine.
And then you could just and then the way I have it set up, and you could change it depending. So I have one network card that shares my actual computer's network connection. That's the bridge adapter. And then I have the other network card, like you did in VirtualBox, that's just only internal. And then what I did is I put all of my other virtual machines on that same internal network. So now they're all routing through the pfSense box. So I can from my Linux Mint desktop here, which you're watching all of this demo be done on, this is actually routing through the pfSense box right now.
That's one of the great things about VirtualBox is you can create these virtual networks.
Yeah.
Right, so you have your pfSense box that's bridged to your real network, and then its second adapters goes to one VMware internal network, or VirtualBox, and then you can set up a couple of machines that share that, and then you can have a second internal network. One of the powers of pfSense is what it can do with multiple network cards. If you add a third NIC, you can set up like a DMZ for your servers.
Yes.
Or you can, when we had ours, we had one NIC that went out to our DSL line at our office, and then we had one that went to our computers, so we called that the secure LAN, one that went to our DMZ for the servers, and then one that was to the wireless we had open for other people in the building.
Perfect.
And so that was a separate IP range and completely isolated from our internal network.
Yeah, and I like the idea of setting up 2 different network cards, and you could run one wireless for like only your guests, and because one of the things you can do with pfSense is captive portal. So you set up a network card, and here's an example of, depending on the hardware you have with pfSense, if you have wireless built in, you could actually convert pfSense into a wireless router itself directly. In my scenario, I had a wireless router plugged into a port, but
that's how mine's set up. I have a wireless router, and it goes into one of the NICs, and the wireless router just has this DHCP disabled, so that the DHCP comes from the pfSense box.
Yeah, perfect. What I kind of wanted to play with is using that captive portal. That's this, those systems probably everyone's familiar with when you're at a coffee shop and you go to browse the web, but before you get to any page, it makes you sign an agreement or maybe even pay. Well, pfSense can set that up for you. So when visitors join your wireless for the first time, they get a captive portal. But pfSense, if you have wireless hardware on the box or multiple interfaces, pfSense can do multiple wireless LANs. So you could have one that's maybe WA protected, maybe the SSID is hidden for your internal users that doesn't have a captive portal page, and then you do one that's public for all your visitors that does have a captive portal page. And then you can, that's just, I love how they just have that just built right in, and they even have plugins in pfSense to tie it into payment options.
Yep.
So if you wanted to set something up like a public library and maybe generate a little revenue for the library or something like that, boom, there you go.
Yeah, and again, you can have 2 there. So you have one for the librarians or whatever, so they don't have to deal with it all the time, and then one for the open side.
Yeah, yeah.
Or even like at my data center when I was there last weekend, they have 2 networks. One for the employees that has a super secure password and is good to go, and then they have a second one that's open for all the customers, and you get a captive portal, and you have to log in with your Pure One account, and then you have access to the internet.
Yep. There you have it. So is there any other like must-do features you think we should cover on pfSense? There's so much to go into. The traffic shaping was really the part I wanted to show people how easy it is to do.
Because that's one of the biggest features that you can't get on almost any other router.
No, maybe I'll mention that. You know, I worked for a company where all of my clients, and maybe even in all the other clients, 50 total installations of NetScreen routers, these Juniper firewall routers that are $1,000 out of the gate. Then you buy support on top of that, and then you have to do things like license, the antivirus scanning, license, quality of service, packet filtering, and this whole dang thing just runs on FreeBSD anyways. So you end up spending $5,000 to get something that you can do with pfSense for free. So the traffic shaping is definitely one of its stronger features. Holy smokes, Alan, that keyboard is loud. Alan's got one of these massive retro gaming keyboards with the clickety-clack spring keys.
Yes, it's Razer Black Widow.
The Jupiter Force that we have for Stoke says that it's angry typing. Is that what they're rage typing? What do they call it?
Something like that.
Boom, 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 yeah. Anyways, if you have any questions about pfSense, let us know, because we're both huge fans and we'd be happy to answer it. And Alan, one of the things I think I want to start doing in the last half segment of the show is getting to people's feedback again. We have not read an email on the Linux Action Show in a very long time. So send us emails, linuxactionshow@jupiterbroadcasting.com, or even better, leave a comment on the show notes page over at jupiterbroadcasting.com. Just look for Season 18, Episode 7, and we can read through those. And if you like one of those comments, go ahead and hit that like button, because then that helps us figure out which comments we should read on the show better. And then,
specifically, I saw someone on the TechSnap one complaining that pfSense wasn't as easy to set up as we made it out to be. And I was like, you need to watch last, because we're going to show you how to do it.
Yeah, it really is quite easy. In fact,
the install literally takes like 3 minutes.
I was going to actually show the install process, but there's nothing really to show. It is a text-based screen.
But full install. Yeah, but if you just choose the default option of like quick install, it's like click, click, done.
Oh, okay. Chat room mentions Untangle. That is also a great product, and that one is Linux-based. The thing about Untangle is they try to upsell you constantly. Like, a lot of the features in Untangle are real basic, and then you have to pay to get any advanced stuff. Whereas pfSense, it's free through and through. And honestly, I like the interface better on pfSense.
Yep.
Just saying. All right. Well, let us know your questions about this, and we'll continue to talk about it maybe in a follow-up segment. And also, be sure to tune into TechSnap as we're really kicking off that home server project. And as we cover some of those topics, like I think next week on TechSnap, we're going to talk about RAID and different types of RAID implementation.
Quite a few different types of RAID, because there's, more and more ones that a lot of people, there's ones, because on TechSnap we talk about not just the one you might use at home, but also, people want to learn about what the ones you would use in a really big deployment. So we'll talk about both, and then likely next week on Last, we'll actually show you how to
set up a RAID or something like that under Linux.
Yeah, even just like a software RAID, even if you don't have a controller. Yeah. But especially if you're trying to do something like RAID 5, where most of the controllers built into a motherboard can't do that.
Yeah.
But if you just need the security and not necessarily the performance, you can get that from the software level.
There you go. So we'll probably be talking about different RAID types and how to set them up in Last next week. I'll at least come up with a couple of different probably configurations you can go for. We'll see. We'll take it where we go from TechSnap and go from there. But doesn't mean you can't send something about pfSense, because we want to read that too. So go ahead and leave a comment on the show notes page and let us know what you think.
Yes, and for both shows, make sure you tell us, when you're building your home server, what would you like it to do?
Yeah.
Because, after we're done with RAID, we need another topic to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you want to accomplish with your home server, and why would you want a server at home? I know what I use mine for, but what do you guys use for? Let us know, and we'll incorporate that in. All right, Alan. Well, that's the Linux Action Show's look at pfSense 2.0. And that brings us to the end of this week's show. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. I thought before we wrapped up, we'd read a little bit of feedback that was left on last week's show, which we covered Ubuntu 11.10. We previewed that. And R.A. wrote in, and he said, "It's unfortunate that Last forgets to talk about the difference of working on downstream and upstream." And I agree with him here. Ubuntu is a well-known distribution of its downstream work, while Fedora and openSUSE are well-known about concentrating on upstream and open source. It would be nice to hear some discussion in Last and give listeners give information about the different styles of work on projects. Both have their advantages and disadvantages. Maybe we should start with the difference between upstream and downstream. Mm-hmm. Alan, do you want to take that? You have like a quick summary of upstream. I guess what upstream would be the source project, and downstream would be the things people apply the work on. That's probably the quickest way to explain it, right?
Yeah.
Like take like the network manager applet in GNOME. If Ubuntu added an option so that you could sync all of your network manager settings from Ubuntu 1, that would be a downstream addition. If they then submitted that code back up to the network manager project and they incorporated that into network manager, that would be an upstream incorporator back to the original source. Now, I think his comment kind of implies that Ubuntu never sends things back to the original source. But what I think he's really getting at is that Ubuntu kind of, its sweet spot is always living downstream. They take everybody else's work, repackage it up.
Right, but in this case, the example of syncing your network settings to Ubuntu 1, that doesn't make sense to put that upstream.
Exactly. And a lot of the work they do doesn't always make sense to go upstream. And we are familiar with some of the times they've tried, like with the notification stuff and kind of got rejected. But, when you look at the contributions to the Linux desktop, what did I mention? I mentioned Network Manager, Fedora project that went upstream, right? So,
well, actually, it's funny you mentioned this because we were talking a little bit about this as it relates to BSD in earlier today.
Yeah.
Before the show.
Yeah.
But because one of the things a lot of Linux people say about the BSD license is that it doesn't force people to open source their changes, and so it results in a lot more downstream work and less code making it back upstream.
Right, where the GPL says, give on to others.
Stay open. So, right. But what a lot of companies have found is even when they're making downstream changes, for example, when Apple added the audit framework, because to be able to be used by the U.S. government, an OS has to meet certain requirements about its audit framework. So after they built that, they could have just kept that, but they decided that if they pushed it upstream back into FreeBSD, that next time they're building the next version of Apple OS X and they wanted to grab code from the latest version of FreeBSD to gain all the advantages that have happened in the meantime, they would have to rebuild their audit framework to work with the new version. But if they pushed it upstream, it would already be there and be maintained by the upstream project rather than themselves.
And interesting, wouldn't SE Linux then be a good comparison? Because SE Linux sort of enables that same auditing and security framework, which was developed by the NSA and then pushed upstream. And now it is a prominent feature of Red Hat Enterprise Linux and Fedora because it went upstream. But a lot of the work that is sort of the end stuff to say support like the Red Hat network and things like that, that's downstream work, stuff that really only benefits Red Hat.
It doesn't apply upstream.
And I think maybe RA's comment was that in the overall like end goal of really overall bettering the Linux desktop, the upstream approach improves everyone, whereas the downstream approach only improves that direct person or that direct distribution. Yeah. I think there's room for both because I think in some ways you're only going to take risks and go off in an interesting direction downstream when you're not the stakeholder of that particular project and you're willing to take some really odd risks. And that's where I think downstream innovation is extremely important in sort of setting the tone and moving things forward. But then you just, because it is all open source, if something downstream is really awesome and really good, there's no reason it can't be pulled up. Exactly. So it's kind of a false argument.
Yeah, well, it's a push-pull thing because it's like sometimes the upstream project isn't interested in what the downstream project has invented.
Exactly, often.
Or is not interested in having to maintain it, right? If code gets pushed upstream, responsibility for it kind of gets shifted.
Yep.
Especially in things that when it's not 100% modular, and so. Some upstream projects just aren't interested in what the downstream project has done.
Right.
Or don't have the capability to maintain it.
I agree, sir. So it's an interesting comment, though, but thanks to RA for sending that in and letting us think about that. He submitted that on our show notes page, and we'd love to hear your thoughts on our show notes page. Show nut. Just give us your show nut thoughts, and we'll try to incorporate them and read them in next week's episode. All right, everyone, just a couple of bits of business before we head out of here. If you'd like to stay up abreast on information that the network is putting out there, you can go get all of your information monitored and tracked by Facebook over at facebook.com/Jupiter Broadcasting, where we post live stream event announcements and also episode releases. There's also, of course, jupiterbroadcasting.com/calendar, where you can just look at our calendar, and you don't have to give anybody your information. That might also be a nice alternative for you. There's also our discussion forum over at jupitercolony.com, IP bans notwithstanding. And on top of that, there's the email address, Linux@Jupiter Broadcasting, or Linux Action Show. I should just make a Linux one. LinuxActionShow@jupiterbroadcasting.com. Now, one last thing. I invite you all to join us live 10 a.m. on Sundays over at jblive.tv. That's 10 a.m. Pacific, because we do this show live, and we love it when you can join our chat room and give us information right here. Right here.
Yes, and we incorporated a bunch of that into the show today.
We did. So thanks to those guys.
And if you need to know what time 10 a.m. Pacific is where you live, that's what the calendar site is for.
Yeah, we do have a time zone converter link right there. You hit that guy, and you can put it in there and then change it to your time zone. All right, everyone. Well, thanks so much for tuning into this week's episode of the Linux Action Show, and we'll see you right back here next week.